never forget the words that sliced through me like a blade. My own son looked me in the eye and told me I wasn't needed anymore, that I had become nothing but a burden. His wife stood beside him, smug, almost relieved, as if finally they could say out loud what they had been thinking for months. In that moment, it felt like my years of sacrifice, my love, my very existence, had been reduced to nothing more than an inconvenience to them. I stood there frozen, stunned, trying to process how the people I had given everything to could discard me so easily. The sting of betrayal cut deeper than anything I had ever known. I wasn't some stranger on the street. I was the mother who raised him, the grandmother who rocked his children to sleep, the woman who had poured decades of her life into making sure he never went without. Yet in that cold instant, I realized I was disposable in their eyes. My heart ached, not just for myself, but for the memory of the family I thought I had. Every insult I had ignored, every small dismissal I had brushed aside, suddenly came rushing back to me. It was as if all those moments had been building toward this one cruel declaration. I could feel the weight of years pressing on me, not just as a mother, but as a widow who had already lost the love of her life. And now, the people who should have been my safe harbor had turned into the storm that threatened to sink me. But here's the thing: they underestimated me. They thought they had stripped me of everything, that I was too weak, too dependent, too afraid to fight back. What they didn't realize was that I still had one card left to play, a card they could never have imagined. And as I stood there, with tears threatening but not falling, I promised myself one thing: this wasn't the end of my story. It was only the beginning. Because justice, when it finally comes, doesn't just heal wounds, it rewrites the ending. So let me take you back. Let me tell you how I got to that breaking point, and why my so-called weakness became the very thing that set me free. I suppose to understand why those words cut me so deeply, you need to know who I am and how I got here. My name is Margaret. I'm 67 years old, and I've been a widow for almost 3 years now. For most of my life, I was just mom or grandma, the woman in the background making sure everyone else was fed, clothed, and cared for. I wore those titles proudly. They weren't a burden to me, they were my joy. When I married John at 22, we didn't have much. He worked long hours at the factory while I stayed home with the children at first. Later, I took a job at the local bank, not because I wanted a career, but because the bills didn't stop coming. And I wanted to make sure my kids never felt the kind of hunger I had known growing up. I worked double shifts when necessary, saved every coupon, patched clothes until the fabric was almost more thread than material. There were years when vacations were nothing more than a picnic at the park or a drive to the lake. But my kids never complained. I was proud of that. I still remember the little rituals that made our house feel like home. Pancakes every Saturday morning, even if the batter was thin and the syrup was store brand. Board game nights when the power went out, where laughter echoed louder than the storm outside. Christmas mornings when John and I stayed up until 02:00 wrapping gifts, making sure every stocking was filled, even if we had to cut corners elsewhere. Those moments made the sacrifices worth it. Every tired back, every dollar stretched, every sleepless night, it was all for the people I loved. And when I look back, I don't regret a thing. But love has a way of blinding you, too. I didn't notice the small cracks when they first appeared. I brushed off the dismissive tone in my daughter-in-law's voice, telling myself she was just tired or stressed. I overlooked the times my son rolled his eyes when I brought up old family traditions, as if my memories were outdated and embarrassing. I even excused it when they started making decisions for me, like I was a fragile piece of furniture instead of a woman who had managed a household and balanced accounts for decades. It started subtly. A comment about how I should let go of certain things. A sigh when I reminded them of something their father used to say. Little moments that stung, but I swallowed my hurt, because that's what mothers do. We tell ourselves not to take it personally, that they don't mean it, that maybe we're being too sensitive. But deep down, I felt the shift. I went from being the center of my family to an afterthought. Someone who could be managed rather than cherished. My voice mattered less. My presence became something to tolerate instead of treasure. And still, I stayed quiet. I thought keeping the peace was better than speaking my truth. After all, wasn't family supposed to stick together no matter what? Wasn't love supposed to cover over small hurts? Looking back now, I realized those small cracks weren't harmless. They were the beginning of something much bigger. The first signs of a fracture that would eventually split wide open. I told myself it was just a phase, that things would get better. But the truth is, I was standing at the edge of a storm I didn't yet see. And when that storm finally broke, it nearly swept me away. At first, I tried to convince myself that the little slights and dismissals didn't mean anything. Families go through phases, I told myself. Maybe they were just busy. Maybe I was reading too much into things. But soon, those small cracks widened into something harder to ignore. It started with money. I lived on a fixed income after John passed. My Social Security check stretched carefully across groceries, utilities, and the little extras I needed to keep my independence. When my son suggested I move in with him and his wife, he framed it as though they were doing me a favor. He said it would save me money, that it was practical and safer. I wanted to believe that. I wanted to think it came from love. But once I settled into their home, things shifted. At first, I offered to help with groceries, thinking it was only fair since I was sharing their roof. Before long, though, my entire check seemed to vanish into household expenses. Rent, utilities, food, it all added up to nearly everything I had. The unspoken truth was clear. I wasn't living there as family. I was living there as a tenant who still had to carry my weight. And it wasn't just the money. Slowly, I became the unpaid housekeeper. I cooked most meals, cleaned the kitchen after gatherings, folded their laundry when they left it in piles. If I hesitated, there was always that sharp look from my daughter-in-law, that silent reminder that I owed my keep. My son stayed quiet, letting her voice speak for both of them. The emotional toll was heavier than the physical work. I remember one evening when they hosted friends for dinner. I spent the entire day preparing appetizers and tidying the house, only to overhear my daughter-in-law joking to her friend that she had the perfect arrangement, a live-in helper who even paid them to stay. I stood there in the kitchen, holding a tray of empty glasses, and felt the humiliation sink in. I smiled politely through the rest of the night, but inside, something cracked. The hardest part was how invisible I became. My thoughts didn't matter. My presence was more nuisance than comfort. Decisions about family holidays were made without me. Even the grandkids, whom I adored, were used as leverage. I was often called on to babysit, not because they valued my time with the children, but because I was convenient and free. I endured it quietly, swallowing my pride. I told myself that keeping the peace was worth more than speaking up. But each day, my dignity slipped further away. I began to feel like I had been reduced to nothing more than labor and a bank account. The breaking point came the day they suggested I move into the basement. They spoke as though it was an upgrade, telling me it would give me privacy and independence. But I knew what it really meant. They wanted me out of sight, tucked away where I wouldn't intrude on their perfect life. To them, I wasn't family anymore. I was an inconvenience to be managed, hidden. That night, as I sat in the upstairs bedroom, I felt the walls close in on me. It wasn't just about a basement. It was about what I had allowed myself to become in their eyes. My sacrifices had been forgotten, my love dismissed, my worth diminished to dollars and chores. And in that moment, the sorrow I carried began to turn into something else, a quiet, simmering strength. Because deep down, I knew this wasn't where my story ended. Something inside me whispered that a reckoning was coming, and soon I would find the power I thought I had lost. The night they told me I would be moved into the basement, I sat alone in my room and felt something inside me collapse. For the first time, I wondered if maybe they were right. Maybe I was just a burden. Too old, too fragile, too dependent. I cried quietly into the pillow so no one would hear. But when the tears finally stopped, I noticed something tucked away in my purse. A simple slip of paper I had carried with me for years, my weekly lottery ticket. I had played the same numbers faithfully for decades, birthdays, anniversaries, milestones that shaped my life with John. It was a ritual that kept me connected to him, a small hope that maybe one day life would surprise me. That night, I turned on the late news more out of habit than anything. My mind was still heavy with thoughts of the basement when the winning numbers appeared on the screen. For a moment, I thought I misheard. I leaned closer, heart pounding, as the announcer read them again. One by one, each number matched mine. My hands trembled as I reached for the ticket in my purse, comparing it against the screen. 7, 14, 23, 31, 45. Powerball 18. Every single one matched. Shock froze me in place. I whispered to myself that it couldn't be real, that it had to be some cruel trick of my imagination. But there it was, printed in black and white. After years of being overlooked, dismissed, and treated as nothing, fate had quietly placed power back into my hands. $53 million worth of power. At first, I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to run downstairs and share the news, to celebrate like families are supposed to. But then I remembered the way they looked at me as an obligation, a problem to be managed, a tenant to be charged. And in that instant, my hesitation melted away. I realized this wasn't just luck. It was justice. A second chance to stand tall. I could feel the despair lifting, replaced with a determination I hadn't felt in years. For the first time since John passed, I knew I wasn't powerless. That night, as I slid the ticket safely back into my wallet, I made a silent vow. They would never see me as weak again. And when the moment was right, I would show them just how strong I could be. In the days after I realized what I held in my hands, I carried myself differently, though I doubt anyone noticed. To them, I was still the same tired woman, trailing behind their schedules and bending to their rules. But inside, I was a storm gathering strength. Every time they spoke about moving me to the basement or hinted at how practical it would be for me to contribute more, I nodded and smiled, all while keeping the ticket tucked safely in my wallet like a secret weapon. I knew I couldn't act on impulse. If there was one thing John always reminded me, it was that strength is most effective when it's measured, not wasted in bursts of anger. His voice came back to me in those quiet nights, telling me to hold steady, to think 3 steps ahead. So, that's what I did. The first thing I did was seek counsel. I called on David, the lawyer John and I had trusted for years, the man who had helped us write our wills and navigate difficult choices. Sitting in his office, with the blinds drawn against the afternoon sun, I handed him the ticket and watched his eyes widen. He didn't treat me like I was incapable. He laid out the facts what claiming the prize would require, how to protect myself legally, how to make sure no one could manipulate me. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was being spoken to as a capable adult, not a fragile old woman. I also began documenting everything. Every payment I had made, every grocery bill I covered, every dollar that had gone toward household expenses. I wrote it all down in neat columns, the way I used to balance the family checkbook. With each entry, I felt my confidence grow. This wasn't just about money. This was about proof. Proof that I had been carrying more than my share, even as they tried to make me feel like a burden. All the while, I kept playing the part they expected of me. I cooked dinners, folded laundry, and cared for the grandchildren when asked. I listened to their plans for renovations, their talk of vacations, their dreams of what the future would look like. I let them believe they were in control, that I was quietly fading into the role they had carved out for me. But inside, I was building my case, brick by brick. Each dismissive glance, each demand, each moment of exploitation became fuel. I no longer felt powerless. I felt prepared. By the end of that week, I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Her shoulders were straighter, her eyes sharper. For the first time in years, I saw not a widow clinging to scraps of respect, but a woman ready to reclaim her dignity. And I knew the time was coming soon. The reveal would not be loud or chaotic. It would be quiet, deliberate, undeniable. The kind of truth that didn't need to shout to shake the ground beneath their feet. I was ready. The moment finally came on a Sunday afternoon. They had gathered in the living room, talking about renovations again, tossing around ideas of what my new space in the basement would look like. I sat quietly, listening, letting them go on as though I were already invisible. When the conversation turned to how much they could save by cutting corners, I decided it was time. I placed my notebook on the coffee table, the one where I had recorded every expense, every dollar I had contributed. At first, they didn't even look up, but when I began to speak, slowly and calmly, their chatter died away. I told them I had been paying more than my share, that I had carried the household far beyond what they admitted. Their faces shifted from annoyance to unease. Then I reached into my purse and laid down the lottery ticket. I didn't wave it or shout. I simply set it there like a quiet truth. For a heartbeat, the room went silent. Then the realization dawned, and their expressions changed: shock, disbelief, a flicker of panic. They had thought they controlled everything. In that instant, they saw how wrong they were. I told them plainly that the ticket was mine, that I had played those numbers for decades, and that the winnings belonged to me alone. I reminded them that I had endured their dismissals, their demands, their cold talk of moving me to the basement, and yet here I was, standing taller than I had in years, with the power to walk away at any moment. They scrambled for words, fumbling excuses about family, about misunderstanding. I let them speak, but I didn't waver. My voice stayed steady, firm. I wasn't angry. I wasn't loud. I didn't need to be. Truth has a weight of its own, heavier than any raised voice. For the first time in years, I felt the balance shift. I was no longer the dependent, no longer the burden they imagined me to be. I was the one holding the future in my hands. And as I stood, ready to leave that room, I knew this was the turning point. Nothing would ever be the same again. The silence in that living room was almost deafening. For years, I had been the one shrinking into quiet corners, but now it was them. Frozen, mouths half open, scrambling for explanations that wouldn't come. I could see it in their eyes, the realization that the life they thought they were planning with my money had just evaporated. And just when they thought they had absorbed the worst of it, I gave them the final blow. I told them about the trust John had set up before he passed, a quiet act of love to make sure I was never left vulnerable. $500,000, invested and growing, waiting for me all this time. He must have known, even then, what kind of people they could become. I watched as the weight of that truth settled over them, heavier than the lottery ticket itself. Not only had I been the one carrying them financially, but they had been drowning in debts I already knew about. Their house of cards collapsed right there in front of me, and for the first time in years, I felt no shame, no guilt, only freedom. I stood tall, knowing I was finally, truly untouchable. Looking back now, I see the journey for what it was, not just a story about money or betrayal, but a story about dignity. For so long, I allowed myself to believe that love meant enduring anything, even mistreatment. I told myself that keeping the peace was more important than protecting my own worth. But the truth is, love without respect is not love at all. My son and his wife showed me something I never wanted to face, that even family can take advantage of you if you let them. It's a painful truth, but also a freeing one. Because once you see it clearly, you have a choice. You can keep shrinking, or you can stand tall. And standing tall doesn't always mean shouting or fighting. Sometimes it means simply refusing to play the part they've written for you. I think of John often, and how he prepared quietly to protect me, even after he was gone. His love reminded me that boundaries are not selfish. They're a form of survival, of self-respect. And that's the lesson I carry forward. It is never too late to reclaim your dignity. Never too late to draw the line and say, this is where it ends. I share my story because I know there are others out there living in silence, feeling like they have no power, no choice. I want you to hear me clearly, you do. Maybe it doesn't come in the form of a lottery ticket or a hidden trust, but it can come in the strength to say no, to step away, to believe you deserve better. Thank you for listening to my journey. If my story touched something in your heart, I invite you to share your own in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps more stories like this find their way to people who might need them most. And remember, you are stronger than you think, and it's never too late to stand up for yourself.